Hello everybody and welcome to another video. Today we're going to be looking at Lion El'Jonson and more specifically the fight he had against every single one of his brothers and the message that the Emperor of Mankind has left for him. We learn about this in his new book, The Lion, Son of the Forest by Mike Brooks. And I gotta say, as a big Dark Angels fan, I was very apprehensive about this book going in, understandably, because this is basically the first Primarch return novel we ever got, because Gulliman came back in Gathering Storm, and so this was a huge deal, and I gotta say, he really stuck the landing on it. It's a really strong book. I am joined by Quipster. How you doing today, mate?
Hello everyone, it's good to be here. I'm doing very good as always. I love talking about Primarchs. I think just as much as you, so I'm very happy to be here.
The Lion doesn't seem to have like any authors that own him, like some of the Primarchs have. I don't think he's like the favorite Primarch to write of any particular author, and I often found that that was telling in the Heresy. But yeah, thankfully it's absolutely amazing. And I got to say, even to this day, it's like reading fan fiction in like the best way possible, because, you know, we're talking about a lion who redeems the fallen, and a lion who's got all of these incredible abilities, and he's gone through this incredible character journey. So it's just a complete change from what we've seen before.
Yeah, 100%. I was talking to a friend of mine about this yesterday, Ewan, actually. And he was saying that, this is possibly a contentious opinion, some of the books that have the lion in them, nothing's really from his POV. There's not many times where his like character, his decision making, his choices are like fully explored. Whereas, I don't know if this is a little spoiler for the book, the Lion, Son of the Forest is from his perspective. You understand his thought process. And we'd never really experienced that before. And he is a very underwritten character, I think, especially in the Heresy.
The thing is about the Lion in the Heresy is that he literally doesn't seem to learn from any of his mistakes. He go through these journeys in one book with Gulliman and Konrad Curze, and then he makes the exact same mistakes in the next book. And I'm just like, didn't we already go through this? He is this very impressive figure. This is the one thing I spoke about in the video when I spoke about Gulliman and the Lion. It's always under said how much both Gulliman and Sanguinius look up to the Lion in a lot of ways. Gulliman outright says that he never looks up to anyone like he does the Lion and Horus. Sanguinius actually like tells the Blood Angels off, and he's like, not about Gulliman, about the Lion. He's like, none of you are ever allowed to say that you're ever allowed to question the Lion's loyalty. He's above reproach.
He's in so many ways the eldest sibling of all the Primarchs.
Yeah,
even though he's not discovered first, he gives off that energy, and they all treat him that way. He's always the one that like they compare themselves to, and he doesn't compare himself to anyone. He just does not care.
Yeah, I mean, in the new book, it's really interesting to see a lion who is completely different now. The Lion's sons in the book are so surprised at how different he is. When he goes to planets, he doesn't demand they follow him. He's got this protectorate, and he's saying, look, you know, we'll protect you if you want us to, but if you don't, no worries. And the Dark Angels are stunned by this, or, you know, the Risen really. And it really makes sense, because what the Lion has gone through is just magnitudes greater than I think what a lot of the other Primarchs go through. So obviously all the Primarchs had to deal with the Emperor's demise, but the Lion was also then betrayed by his brother / friend, and his planet was destroyed, and his legion, which the strength of the Dark Angels is spoken about often in the Horus Heresy when they appear, and like, you know, even compared to the Ultramarines and the Blood Angels, the Dark Angels are ridiculously drilled, and they're so up themselves, and they think they're so impressive, and they're just amazing at everything. One of my favorite quotes that like really proves this, there's a bit in the Lion's Primarch novel where they talk about how the structures of the Dark Angels are impressive by the standards of the Imperial Fists. That's such an insane like fact to have about the Dark Angels, because like obviously that's the Imperial Fists thing. Everything about them so amazing, and to then find out that, you know, well, it turns out not all of them betrayed him in the end, but a lot of the Dark Angels did betray the Emperor. It's just completely forced him to reevaluate everything about himself.
There's a minor little thing that, as an Emperor's Children player, kind of got me a little bit about the First Legion. You know, in the Horus Heresy Dark Angels transfer sheet, one of the big ones is you're supposed to put it on the side of a Spartan or a Land Raider. It's like a Grim Reaper.
Yeah.
That is on a piece of artwork somewhere. It's like a Spartan, and that's on the side. And the passage underneath it talks about how the Dark Angels are good at everything, including art. And it's just all the art they make tends to be quite dark and ominous. And as an Emperor's Children player, I was just like, screw you guys. That's our thing. You can't have everything. But they do, because that's their whole deal. They're the progenitors. They're good at everything. They're the Marines that everyone aspires to be. A perfect example of that is a bit where one of the Imperial Fists has a duel against a Dark Angel, and the guy who's doing this duel is the head of the Templars. So, big deal. This is a big boy. One of the not best, if not the best fighter in the entire Imperial Fists. And he gets taken on by one of the companions, I think, the Dark Angels. And before this fight happens, one of the things that the Imperial Fists are talking about between themselves is, oh God, the Dark Angels neophytes make our veterans look like children. Are you going to be okay in this fight? Obviously he's not, but the comparison there, I think, is fascinating, because it just goes to show how leagues ahead the Dark Angels are supposed to be compared to everyone. And it's the same with the Lion.
Yeah, absolutely. And then they go through this gigantic humbling, and we get to the Son of the Forest. And the main part we're going to talk about today is actually towards the end. So this is a huge spoiler for the book if you haven't read it. But I feel like enough time has passed now. If you're going to read that book, you'll probably at least have started it. So to get to this scene, the Lion has gone through this massive journey. He's encountered sons that are loyal to him, sons that are not loyal to him. He's had to quell some of his own sons and actually kill his own sons, even though he's now on this mission to try and save them in general. But he has also developed this ability to enter this mythical place known as a mirror version of Caliban, and the Watchers in the Dark are there. And at the start of the book, there's this area that he's told not to go to by the Watchers in the Dark because he's not strong enough. And then he makes his way back to Mirror Caliban at the end of the book, and he says, can I go this way now? Am I strong enough? And the Watchers in the Dark say, I don't know. You might be. Let's find out. So anyway, he goes there and he encounters. Well, we'll get straight into it. The very first person that he encounters is actually Leman Russ. He walks up and he sees Leman Russ, and Leman Russ is, of course, very angry, because he's always very angry. Well, actually, I say of course, but really, it's quite shocking to the Lion that Leman Russ is so angry with him. Leman Russ calls him a traitor, and the Lion knows that Leman Russ knows this is not true, because they met after the Horus Heresy. The Lion actually stabs Leman Russ, but he has one last attempt to goad Leman Russ into a fight, because in his deep state of grieving, he just cannot process the fact that the Emperor is now stuck on the Golden Throne. And to the Primarchs, it very much feels like the Emperor is dead, even though, as we know in 40K, he's technically not. But at the same time, when he sees Leman Russ calls him a traitor, and the Lion says, you know that's not true. They get immediately into a duel. And one of the reasons I wanted to talk about this passage is because we get brief overviews of the Lion's relationship with every single Primarch, essentially, because it's very quickly revealed that this Leman Russ that he's fighting against is not Leman Russ. It's some sort of demon or a warp entity. And this demon actually transforms into another one of his brothers. He transforms into Horus Lupercal, the War Master. Whereas Lionel Johnson is the firstborn, Horus Lupercal is the first found. And as Quipster was talking about earlier, this puts them in this place of the big brothers of the Primarchs, a lot of them kind of view them in this regard. And Gilliman talks to the Lion about this and the heresy and says that like the Lion is the only one, from his point of view, that Horus thinks is his equal. And interestingly, they never really ever got along, it seems, because they have this big argument that's covered in, I want to say, Angels of Caliban, off the top of my head. After Luther and a bunch of the other Dark Angels are sent back to Caliban because of the fact that, Luther was he delayed saving the Lion's life when it was threatened in a previous campaign, then they're sent back to Caliban and they're obviously very bored. So when Horus Lupercal calls for aid, Luther leads the Dark Angels and they go and aid him. And after this, they defeat whatever threat it is. I can't remember what it is now. They're like celebrating on the vengeful spirit. Horus Lupercal, I think Typhus is there, Erebus is there, and a bunch of Dark Angels. They're all celebrating this great victory in the Great Crusade. And then suddenly it's revealed that Lionel Johnson has snuck aboard the vengeful spirit and nobody has noticed him coming. So there's just all of a sudden a wild Lionel Johnson, very unhappy with Horus Lupercal. He says, you don't ever spend my son's lives. And he rebukes Luther very publicly, further pushing Luther away. We actually find this out in the Luther's novel, where we find out that those actions then pushed Luther towards Typhus, or Typhon at the time, and Erebus, and into the arms of chaos. So if the Lion had maybe got along with Horus a bit better here, then things might have been quite different.
Yeah. I remember that bit in the books and thinking, like, oh, God, why? Because you can tell it's a turning point.
Yeah, it is. It's definitely a hell of a confident move from the Lion. Horus is, of course, revered and loved by everyone, and he just walks right up to him and tells him off to his face. And it's one of those things that, you see Lupercal being this ultimate politician, because he kind of takes it in his stride and he's like, yo, hey, come on, man. He's a bit better than I am, but he encourages his brother to kind of calm down. So anyway, Horus Lupercal and Lionel Johnson, they have this fight, and there's a bunch of columns around, they're throwing each other through things, and then the demon changes into another form, and this time he changes into Perturabo. Now, Perturabo represents for the Lion, or maybe his greatest mistake in the Horus heresy, because in the book Fallen Angels, we find out that the Lion actually gives a bunch of siege weapons to Perturabo that are later used in the Siege of Terra. Throughout this book, he's kind of claimed these weapons from Sons of Horus, and then he just gives them to Perturabo, not knowing at the time that Perturabo was a traitor. I think, to the Lion's credit, nobody knows that Perturabo was a traitor at this point. The Emperor doesn't even know. So, on the one hand, you can argue that it was a bit of a screw up, but everyone screwed up at that point in the heresy, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's the entire basis of the drop site massacre.
yeah, true.
No one knows 4 legions have turned, and they do, and everyone dies.
Yeah. I will say the Lion has a pretty funny retort when the demon turns into Perturabo. He says, you might at least have found a brother for whom I ever cared.
Oh, that is a burn.
Yeah.
God damn. As we go through the interactions in this scene with each of the Primarchs, it really hit me that there are a bunch of Primarchs that in the Heresy novels haven't met. One that springs to mind immediately is Corax and the Lion. There's nothing between them in the entire heresy.
Well, it is really funny that you say that, Quipster, because the next Primarch that the demon turns into is Jaghatai Khan. And to your point there, so I found this out the other day, and I think you'll find this really interesting, actually, mate. So this was a video I was researching on the Lion, and I was reading the background books for the Horus Heresy. So this is the previous edition of the Horus Heresy. They wrote a bunch of background books. Now, those books have a lot of lore in that just isn't covered in the novels, like the whole Thramas Crusade for the Dark Angels, for example, is basically in there. And in that book, it actually says, and this is a relatively recent book, I don't know exactly what year, but I would guess 2019-ish, it says that Lionel Johnson's closest brother is Jaghatai Khan. Now, the White Scars, for example, do appear in Descent of Angels. They support the Dark Angels during the Thramas Crusade, but to my knowledge, Jaghatai Khan and the Lion have never met in the books. And they're described as being the Lion's closest brother, which is a really interesting idea, like another classic.
I love that. And like, when you get told that, immediately you're just like, oh, okay, I see it.
Yeah,
I see
do.
why.
Both legions have half of them turn traitor.
Even in terms of their personalities, like, they're both quite reserved, aloof. Yes. There's a lot going on, behind the scenes. Like, I would say both of them are actually classically introverted. They have this, great panoply of war, and one of the big White Scar things is they're into art and calligraphy and stuff. They're both not very showy at all.
Yeah.
I think they just have a lot of personality traits in common, that they would sort of meet each other, sort of feel each other out, take a bit of time to get to know one another. Like, perfect example, the Khan's first meeting with Sanguinius doesn't go how you think it would. There's no like, oh, brother, hug or whatever. The Khan is very laid back, aloof, reserved, doesn't immediately succumb to Sanguinius's like charm and charisma. And I think that's the same thing. Yeah, exactly. That's the same thing with how I expect the Khan and the Lion to interact. They would both sort of like feel each other out and then slowly get to realize like, he's just like me. Okay, cool. This works.
Next, interestingly, the demon turns into Magnus the Red. Again, not a lot of relationship here. However, clearly they have sparred at some point during the Great Crusade, because the Lion actually says, "Now I know you are a fraud. Magnus never hit that hard." Which I think is like, I always say as well, we've spoken about how much we like this book, and it's a really, really fun book. And I'd recommend you read it, even if you're not like a Dark Angels fan. But like, yeah, there's so many quips in this scene. Like, it's really, really back and forth. You got to remember the Primarchs are brothers, and so that comes through very clear.
I really love that, especially because there's two ways you could take that. Him commenting on Magnus being weak, which is like just untrue, because Magnus is physically one of the two biggest Primarchs.
True.
For a start. He's massive. And I think it's more a comment on the fact that one thing I think people forget about Magnus is that he's one of the most friendly Primarchs. Like, he kind of just wants to be everyone's bro. And so like, there's I can't remember which novel alludes to it, but he's got this very strong sense of like bonhomie with the rest of the other Primarchs. And so him not hitting that hard is, I think, more of a comment on the fact that Magnus pulled his punches because he didn't want to hurt anyone, in the same way that Vulkan did as well.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I mean, I guess that's the thing. Like, if people do want to play the game, like, technically, of who is the strongest Primarch and who would win in the duel and the fight and all that kind of thing, you kind of have to give it to Magnus, because if they ever were properly allowed to go all out, unless you happen to have a load of Sisters of Silence in your back pocket, you're out of luck against
the guy with magic powers is going to win.
Yeah, it's like bringing planets into reality and throwing cities at people. He becomes the size of a titan. Like, just, it's complete nonsense that this man can do, of course, because he's, got the Emperor's psychic gifts, or at least a good chunk of it. When Mortarion comes up next, we get another comment about the Lion looking old. This has come up a lot in the community, because a lot of people are wondering, kind of, why is Lionel Johnson so old now, and how big of a deal it is. Now, interestingly, for me, this scene actually tells us a bit about why the Lion looks old, from my point of view. So this demon that he's fighting, it doesn't have like omniscience. It doesn't have total knowledge of the Primarchs. It is using the Lion's perceptions of his brothers to create these forms. So when Leman Russ is really angry at him, well, that's how he fears Leman Russ would treat him. When he sees Horus Lupercal, he's actually going off the last time he saw him, and he's adding in bits of description that other Primarchs gave the Lion of Horus Lupercal, because the Lion never saw Horus during the heresy. So the fact that Mortarion brings up this fact and is like, look, are you just old now? Are you just getting old? Are you worn down and broken? He says to the Lion. And I think you and I have spoken about this before, actually, Quipster, personally, where I think a lot of how the Lion looks now is his own creation. So the general reason given, if you're completely out of the loop, is that the Lion wasn't actually put in stasis for 10,000 years. He was just asleep. So he's aged 10,000 years, which for a Primarch looks about 15, right? So that's the general idea. But at the same time, Primarchs are warp beings. The Emperor used warp stuff in their creation. And so that means that his physical form is just like a manifestation. Corvus Corax talks about this when he finds Lorgar, and he says, like, I am what we all were. And it's a very loose description that we get of what Corvus Corax looks like now, but we do know that he's like this kind of warp, shadow, raven entity. Some people like to say he's like a demon prince. That might be accurate, it might not be accurate. Black Library writers don't like to pigeonhole themselves for future books, so I can't give you too much information. It's very kind of vaguely written. He can take human form if he wants to, but he is like a warp thing. So the form that Lionel Johnson has now is, in my opinion, I think is going to be his own creation. He just thinks he's old. He thinks he's gotten much slower. And so that's what we're seeing there. We actually see Leman Russ in the end of his Primarch novel, grey and old. But Leman Russ shouldn't look that old by that stage. What if this is the same thing where Leman Russ just thinks he's much older? Maybe he thinks he's gotten slower, or perhaps it's the other way where he thinks he's gotten wiser and more mature. So his appearance has changed to reflect that. I think there's a good chance that's what's going on when we see the Lion's appearance.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And one thing I find kind of fascinating about this novel in general is just how far the Lion has come in terms of his emotional maturity. I think the one scene that really gets me is the bit with the early Lion's Guard, which is just essentially a bunch of humans.
Yeah.
It's so funny. So like, there's a bunch of humans that like appoint themselves to be his bodyguards, and he just kind of rolls with it because he's like, they need to feel important, so I guess I'll let them do this. Despite the fact that he's a Primarch. He doesn't need like 20 humans to be his bodyguard at all, and he knows it. I think they know it too, but he wants to make them feel useful. He wants to make them feel part of everything. And he just would not have had that emotional maturity back in the heresy to understand that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. This really shocks his sons. The Lion's one of the tallest Primarchs, so he has this huge stride, but he slows down a lot as they all follow him. The Lion keeps entering Mirror Caliban and ending up on different planets, but they don't have furniture for these 10-foot demigods. So, like, none of their beds are the right size. And, of course, all of these like nobility on these planets, like, panicking and, like, trying to find the biggest chairs they have to sit on, which, it's actually quite funny.
There's a bit with that, like that with Gilliman as well, when he first comes back. They have to get his old furniture out of museums so he has somewhere to sit.
After the Lion has a bit of a bout with Mortarion, the demon actually transfers into Rogal Dorn, who's your boy, actually, Quipster, and
my boy.
This is interesting because, again, this kind of shows some fear that the Lion has. Dorn says to the Lion that the Emperor never trusted you. That is why he sent you far away into the darkest corners while keeping me close, which is just not a very Dorn thing to say. Dorn wouldn't say that. That's definitely coming from the Lion's insecurity, in my point of view. The Lion talks about this in his Primarch novel. He has a conversation with the Emperor where he does have this kind of fear during the Great Crusade. He's done all of these horrible jobs. He says that he's brought like more worlds into compliance than any two Primarchs, but he says he's not going to be remembered for anything other than destruction. Every crusade the Dark Angels go on, the Emperor chooses crusades purposefully that are going to require, absolute deadly force. Whereas Primarchs like Gilliman and Lorgar, these are Primarchs that, build these incredible civilizations, even though Lorgar goes a bit over the top, they are going to be remembered for these things. And the Lion says something like, I'm just going to be remembered for fire and ash. Here he seems to be suggesting that he fears that the Emperor actually didn't trust him, which doesn't seem to be the case.
Still, I get the insecurity, because it's kind of like Perturabo on steroids. Because Perturabo was sent to do all the really crap jobs that no one else could be trusted with, because he's the one with the mind and the skill set to do it. And it's kind of the same thing with the Lion. He's sent to do essentially all the horrible extermination jobs. This is the worst possible race we've ever encountered. The only people who can do it are the Dark Angels and the Lion. It makes logical sense, but if you're on the receiving end of that, it's also a bit like, oh, why do I keep getting picked for this? What in my character that has been created makes me good for this? And is that a bad thing for me?
If you've watched my video on the Lion and the Men of Iron, then you'll know that actually the Emperor has a huge amount of trust in the Lion. And one of the Lion's roles during the Great Crusade, and this doesn't really come up in the novels, is the fact that the Lion is entrusted with this secret plan to destroy the Mechanicum should they ever rebel against him. And in actual fact, the Emperor gives the Lion permission to destroy the Mechanicus sites that are loyal to the Emperor if the Lion believes that they might one day be used against the Imperium. So the Lion actually, under the Emperor's orders, destroys loyalist Mechanicus elements in secret throughout the Great Crusade. I think it's 8 times he said he does this. The Emperor clearly has a huge amount of trust in the Lion, because none of the other Primarchs that we know of have anything like this.
It goes back to something they mentioned in the Lion Primarch novel, in that the Dark Angels are supplied from Earth, from Terra specifically. They're not given stuff from Martian forges for that reason, I assume.
That does come up in the Dark Angels books, because of course all of the Iron Wings crazy technology, the Dark Angels know that the Mechanicus would go absolutely mad for it. I will say, if there is any Primarch that potentially, if you want to go full conspiracy theorist and you want to say that there's a Primarch that the Emperor trusted above everyone else, there's an argument nowadays to be made for Alpharius, who the demon then turns into, because we've spoken about his Primarch novel, where there is this theory that technically Alpharius was the first Primarch to awaken, and he was incredibly close and tutored by Malcador, and completed all of these secret missions for Malcador and the Emperor over the ages. So potentially he's more loyal. We'll see. Alpharius and the Lion actually do have a little bit of an interaction that's pretty cool. This is covered in Alpharius' Primarch novel. Alpharius sneaks into all of the legions over the Great Crusade, and especially when they are recently found, because he wants to kind of check out what his brothers are actually like, but he does it in secret, and he does impersonate a Dark Angel, and then he impersonates just an Alpha Legionary, because he meets the Lion face to face, and when he does this, the Lion just thinks he's a member of the Alpha Legion, because Alpharius hasn't technically been found at that point. And so the Lion doesn't know he's talking to his lost brother in his, well, technically not his lost brother, but you know what I mean. So he smashes the Alpharius's head into this pylon, and it said that he really enjoys that, so he just keeps doing it. However, then the demon turns into Angron. And Angron, because the Lion says, you never had the stomach for a fair fight. And then the demon turns into Angron. It's a fair fight. Not a lot of dialogue from Angron, as you can imagine. Again, the Lion and Angron don't have a huge amount of interaction, really.
I always thought that was a shame, because, they're a really interesting juxtaposition next to each other, because you've got the ultimate controlled focus of the Lion against the uncontrollable rage of Angron. The Lion has this whole tirade, or this whole speech, where he talks about him compared to Gulliman, and how he is a man of focus. He's like the John Wick of the Warhammer universe, and he is exceptionally good at focusing on a single thing, and that's one of his big strengths. Gilliman's strength is that he can't focus on any one thing. He focuses on everything.
It makes a lot of sense, because that's kind of why the Lion is so good at everything, and why Gilliman, for example, wouldn't be the best swordsman, because he's got so much going on. Like, he's thinking about 20 different things at once. Exile power users away. Another Primarch that, of course, we don't see much interaction with is Ferrus Manus. However, he does kind of challenge the Lion, and he says, "Where was your vengeance?" I don't really know what more expected him to do, really, because he did actually bring vengeance upon Chemos. So, could have been worse. Then the demon turns into Corax, and Corax says, "Where was your guile?" Now, I believe Corax and the Lion do meet up towards the end of the heresy with Leman Russ, I think, in a short story. Yeah, I think so. I'll cut this out if that's wrong, but I believe they meet up right before they go back to Terra. Sorry, these are all in quite quick succession, so we don't get a lot on them. So then the demon turns into Fulgrim, and Fulgrim says, "You never were good enough." That is definitely something that Fulgrim would say. I think we can agree. Very much in line with what he would say. And interestingly, and this is something that comes up in the Lion's book, when the demon turns into Lorgar next, it's quite interesting because Lorgar makes quite an obvious comment that you'd imagine, where he says, "Now you accept the worship due to a god." Now, this is something that the Lion ponders over in the book. He does absolutely acknowledge that he's being treated basically as a demigod because everyone in the Imperium treats the Emperor as a god. And this was one of the kind of smaller surprises in the book, and it obviously makes sense because, as we've talked about today, the Lion has grown so much in his character, but I think most people were expecting the Lion to put up a greater resistance to the ideals of the Imperial Creed, but he doesn't, really. He kind of accepts it. He still obviously believes in the Imperial truth, but he allows people to worship the Emperor. He doesn't stop it, and I think people were kind of expecting that dichotomy between him and Gulliman, that Gulliman would be the reasonable one with the Imperial Creed and it would allow them to worship, but the Lion would put his foot down. It is something that the Lion is very concerned with. It does say that he does kind of correct people on this when it comes up, but he doesn't go out of his way to kind of diminish the belief of the Imperial Creed. The next Primarch that the demon turns into is an exciting one because it is Roboute Gulliman himself. Now, this, again, I don't think matches at all with what Roboute Gulliman is actually feeling. So Gulliman says to the Lion, "You dared preach to me about my faults, but when the chance came to return to Terra, you decided to burn some planets instead." Which it does not match at all. So if you've watched my video where I talk about Gulliman and the Lion, I actually go through the last meeting with the Triumvirate where Sanguinius, Gulliman, and the Lion, say their goodbyes. Now, it highlights two things. The first is that Gulliman is not annoyed about this fact at all. No one pushes back on the Lion when he says, I'm going to take my lessons from the heresy and use them against our enemies. So if you're very familiar with the Lion, a very common criticism within the 40K in the community is that the Lion didn't go to Terra with Gulliman straight away. However, we find out in the Siege of Terra that the Lion has quite a big impact, and in a way, he saves Sanguinius' life. So the Lion destroys the traitor homeworlds for two reasons. The first is that it will pull some traitor elements away from the Siege of Terra, and they'll obviously want to leave and go and defend their homeworlds. That impact won't be too great. However, what the Lion discovers during the heresy is that the warp is a reflection of our reality. And so if you destroy the traitor homeworlds, the traitors have no rooting in reality anymore, and so their warp components are weakened. And we actually see this through the eyes of Sanguinius, that Angron actually gets weaker when Nuceria is destroyed. And so when Sanguinius fights against Angron, he's actually slightly weakened, and he doesn't gain that power back until the World Eaters claim a new planet in the Eye of Terra. So the Lion's role here is not as controversial as you might think in the galaxy, and Gulliman certainly didn't have a problem with it. And in fact, logically, it was probably the right decision because the Ultramarines are more than enough to get Horus to lower the shields on the Vengeful Spirit. They arrive in the end of Echoes of Eternity, I think, and then in End of the Death, the shields are lowered. So it's the Ultramarines are more than enough, and they aren't able to actually get through the warp storms surrounding the Sol system. So Up next, Sanguinius does ask the lion, had you not done so, would I have lived? Again, Sanguinius was perfectly happy with the lion going on his venture, but again, this is appealing to the lion's kind of insecurities here, because one thing the lion does say in this book, I said earlier that his closest brother was Jaghatai Khan, but his most beloved brother was Sanguinius. And the fact that the lion would call Sanguinius the emperor, that on its own is incredible, because the lion would never do this for anyone else. Up next is the big man himself. It is Vulkan. Again, not a lot on Vulkan and the lion. They are both in the Unremembered Empire, technically, but there's not a lot between them. Would I have died? Vulkan hisses to the lion. So again, the lion doesn't understand the concept of perpetuals at this point in time. He doesn't understand what Vulkan is. He doesn't know that he's almost certainly still alive. So to him, he thinks Vulkan's probably dead.
I think I find it most fascinating the things that the lion doesn't know, because we have this perception that we're outside the universe looking in, so we just kind of know everything. But a lot of the drama is from what don't these characters know and understand? Super basic stuff like Vulkan can't die. Not everyone knows that.
Yeah,
even his own brothers.
The revelation that the warp, that you can destroy things in our reality that will weaken demons. We know that because we know the warp is a reflection of this reality, but that's not known because the Emperor kept so much hidden. The final Primarch that the demon turns into is the one we haven't spoken about yet. So you can probably guess. It's Konrad Curze, who the lion has an extensive relationship with through the heresy and the Thramas Crusade. And there's a very, very long game of cat and mouse. It's definitely a part of the heresy I think people will point to when you look about where it gets too bloated, because they go through the same fights again where they're like, oh my god, Curze blew something up and ran away. Who'd have guessed? So Konrad Curze says, at least I knew which of my legion deserved to die. And then the lion says, they all did. It's really interesting because, of course, this is the lion's probably greatest insecurity. We've talked about a bunch of them today, but the fact that the Dark Angels are no longer this perfect legion and they can fall, it brings everything into question for the lion. The one thing he was so certain in was the fact that his sons were above all the other legions, and they were so amazing. They were the first Space Marines to be made, and they were the true Angels of Death. They coined that name, and they taught the other legions, and the lion was found, and they accomplished all these wonderful things. But no, it kind of all feels for naught now, because a lot of his sons, or at least some of them, I will say, do betray the Imperium, which is a bit of a gut punch. And we're very used to the Dark Angels having this traitor element in 40k, but again, as you say, Quips, the stuff you don't know, the lion didn't know this.
I mean, the thing is, and we've talked about this before, way before the lion came out, I remember, we talked about how would the lion react to the modern Dark Angels chapter. And I think we basically came down on the fact that he would react very badly to them because they've strayed so far from this knightly ideal that he had for the original Dark Angels Legion. They've become this secretive, horrible, uncaring organization, which arguably you could say, oh, they were just like that in Heresy. Yes, but the modern Dark Angels Legion doesn't care as much about the wider objectives of the Emperor and the Imperium that the old Legion did. They will drop a mission that is critical for a sector of the Imperium if there's a fallen nearby. They don't care. Yeah. They'll do it.
And then, I should say, this is the end of the book. So he gets the Emperor's shield and he destroys the demon, and the book ends. Lionel Johnson has returned. The other thing we wanted to talk about in this stream is this character called the Old King, who appears throughout the book. Now, most people believe that this is some sort of avatar or some sort of symbolism for the Emperor, and he exists in this mirror Caliban, and he doesn't talk, he doesn't communicate with the lion. One of the things that suggests he's the Emperor is because the lion can tell that he's wounded, and of course we all know in Warhammer 40k that the Emperor is in constant pain and his body is absolutely ravaged. And although when you look at him, you can't see any wound, the Lion can just kind of tell he's like this wounded creature. The Lion kind of finds the king multiple times throughout the book. And one of the later times he finds him in this castle. And as the Lion approaches, the king can't talk, which again kind of matches this idea of the Emperor, that the Emperor doesn't actually speak directly to people. He has ways of communicating, which is something I've talked about on the channel before, but he doesn't really communicate as you or I would. And there's this plot line around the Lion needing to find the right question to ask the king, which is really interesting.
Yeah, 100%. I thought that bit of the book was absolutely fascinating.
We do get some really interesting symbolism. The Lion pauses when he's a few paces away from the table. The lustre of the wood is hidden beneath a patina of dust. I don't know what that is, but 3 objects sit on it, arranged as though with some ritual significance. A golden candelabra, more ornate than those decorating the walls, is in front of the king and on his right. On his left is a spear or lance, also golden, the blade of which is wet with blood. Directly in front of the king is a broad golden chalice with figures moulded around the bowl. So when you hear those things, of course, you can't not think about Primarchs, from my point of view, Quipster. So the golden spear absolutely makes you think of Russ. The Emperor gives Russ the Dionysian spear. Did I get that the right way around? The Apollonesian spear? One of those two. Dionysian's going to be...
Apollonian.
Apollonian. Apollonian, I want to say,
the Apollonian spear is Valdor's.
Yeah. These spears are opposite. Essentially, Leman Russ's spear, if you get stabbed by it, it like reveals a truth to you, so it cures Horus of his madness temporarily. Constantine Valdor's spear, it allows you to learn truths from those that you kill. And this is fundamental to Valdor's plot development to 40k, in my opinion, because as Valdor stabs demons, as he stabs the vengeful spirit himself, he starts learning all these truths from like horrific entities. So he's obviously got a level of knowledge about the warp that no one else in the galaxy does at this point.
There's also another thing with the spear. Immediately when you said spear and spear with blood on it, immediately I'm thinking Sanguinius, because Sanguinius' main weapon is a spear, and he's a blood angel.
It could be Sanguinius, but there's also the chalice. I thought the chalice represented Sanguinius. It could all be about Sanguinius, and I think there is this kind of like theory that people went to of like, oh, is this some sort of suggestion that Sanguinius could be resurrected? I'll be honest, guys, I don't think that's ever going to happen. I don't think that's ever a plotline GW will go down, purely because it undercuts a lot of the setting, in my opinion. But potentially in the long run, 30 years or so down the line, we'll see.
I mean, I will personally say, I think I have no knowledge of this. I have to caveat this. I think they'll bring back all the Primarchs in different forms.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, they're just worth too much money. The amount of money that Mortarion earned was insane. It's a ridiculous amount of money that Primarchs earn in Games Workshop. You're talking tens of millions of pounds, given that people buy armies when Primarchs come out. Like, it's a huge deal. My thought was spear is Russ. The blood on it is a reference to the fact that Russ needs some sort of help from the Lion. And I think if anyone can find Russ, the Lion is the man, because there's often this talk of the Primarchs being connected, and Leman Russ and the Lion have a connection stronger than maybe any two Primarchs nowadays. And so I think there's a good chance the Lion will actually be able to trust himself to find the Leman Russ somehow. What was interesting was, the broad golden chalice. I thought that was just to talk about the Lion's role in protecting the line of Sanguinius. If you're not familiar, the Blood Angels are nearly destroyed on multiple occasions in Warhammer 40k, and Gilliman absolutely recognises how important they are. And Sanguinius, certainly, the Emperor probably know of this important future for what we think is Dante, where Dante will be this golden warrior that protects the Emperor at some point in the future. So I think one of the Lion's purposes is to actually protect Dante. And the final one, the golden candelabra, more ornate than those decorating the walls, like, this is something about illumination. This is something about knowledge that I think the Lion needs to find some sort of knowledge for the future. So that's my guess for what this means. Is I think the Lion needs to save Russ, and he needs to protect the Blood Angels, and I think he needs to discover some sort of knowledge to save the Imperium that will enlighten everyone.
I'm not gonna lie, you've blown my mind right there. Like, you really have, because I was really struggling to find the metaphors in those, for sure. I was concentrating more on the words and like the scene itself. Like, for example, the idea that you've got this old king who's the whole patina of dust, like on the
yes, someone has commented. Thank you. A platina is a fine layer. Thank you for that.
Yeah. Basically, it all kind of shows the state of the Imperium, the desperation, the decay, the idea that it needs to be saved. Things are not going well. The Lion is a vital figure coming in to sort of not save the day, but do what he can. I think towards the end of the scene, it's almost like the wounded king is like angry at the Lion for not quite asking the correct questions, as if he's desperate and he's just like, could you just get on with this and like do what you're supposed to do?
Although, if in most of Dark Imperium, Gilliman actually doesn't remember his conversation with the Emperor. That's what's so crazy about it. It's also the case that he does know that the Emperor doesn't seem to really like him, the way the Emperor talks to Gilliman. But I think the reason for that is because the Emperor, he will tell his sons what he needs to tell them. That won't necessarily be what they want to hear. Oh, sonny boy, I love you so much. Give me a hug. It will be probably some harsh truths. So yeah, the idea that he's going to be very stern with his sons makes sense.
Well,
ZB has commented, it could be the Astronomicon, the golden candelabra. That's a very good point. Obviously, it could be something to do with the candelabra. Very, very good shout.
I was just going to say, what's the greatest amount of physical pain you've ever been in?
I don't know. I had appendicitis when I was a kid. That was quite bad.
Yeah. Did you ever try and talk to anyone when you were going through that?
I see where you're going. Yeah,
exactly. Like, if you are undergoing that level of physical pain, it gets to the point where
quite snappy.
It doesn't matter who you're speaking to. If it's your mum, your brother, your dad, your best friend, you can't just be like, oh, just do what I need you to do. No matter the love and respect you have for that person. If you're desperate, you'll just say things. Like, you'll get straight to the point.
Yeah, there's this thing that goes on where the Watcher says, you did not ask the correct question to the king, to the Lion. And, the Lion asks, who are you? How may you be healed? He starts to say, like, where do you come from? The Lion's trying to figure out what the correct question is. And clearly there's some sort of message that it's trying to deliver to the Lion, which is what we all need to kind of figure out. The plot line for the Lion has been planned out quite extensively, at least for the nearby future. Undoubtedly, Black Library will have a loose roadmap already of how the Primarchs are going to return, or at least the next few.
I've been really impressed with the direction that 40K, especially in terms of the Lion, is going. So, like, those Arcs of Omen books, I personally thought the narrative in them was very impressive, especially compared to Psychic Awakening. And everything they set up there, the Lion coming back, the fight with Angron, the T'Challa machine, and the Echoes of Caliban. That whole journey I thought was fascinating and sets up a really interesting journey for 40K now and the Lion. So I'm fascinated to see, like, what happens. Where do they go?
No, absolutely. So I will say to finish off this scene, it's really interesting. So earlier in the book, the Lion saw the king in a boat, and he was surrounded. There were like these shadows in the water, and as the candelabra shines, he sees again there's like these weird shadows surrounding the king. And the Watcher has said that these shadows will destroy him, which I guess does actually go a long way to suggest that the candelabra represents the Astronomicon in some way. So potentially the Lion's journey is going to intersect with that storyline, Chris Wraith's storyline, which would be really interesting. That would actually be really cool. That would be a good intersection. Yeah. Chris Wraith is very good at connecting stories together. It's one of the things he does very well in his Regent Shadow and the Vaults of Terror series. So that would be really cool to see. Yeah, but the Lion doesn't really understand. He doesn't come to any proper conclusions by the end of this book as to what his role is supposed to be. He's very uncertain on how to fight against these mysterious shadows, which we assume are demons. That's obviously the go-to answer there.
Yeah, 100%. I think that particular bit's a little bit cut and dry into what we expect that to be. But you know what? After talking about this the whole time, I'm kind of desperate to go and buy a lion now.
Do you mean a model or a exotic cat?
You know, I was tempted to just buy a lion to keep in my flat, and just a massive wild animal.
That would be really cool. That would be really cool. Yeah, no, I have. He's actually right next to me. If you are wondering why I am so biased towards the Dark Angels, that's why, because they are my favorite army. They have been for a very, very long time. Like I say, hats off to Mike Brooks. It all just kind of fell into place. And yeah, we've now got this. I mean, I'm not going to lie. The Lion cements himself, in my opinion, as like one of the most complex characters in all of Warhammer now. He has an actual character arc for a Primarch. He's not just like incredibly stoic and amazing all of the time. He goes through a genuine arc. He actually comes out as like a really interesting character, which is what you want.
I agree. The thing with characters that are that special and that powerful, it's kind of like the Superman problem. Because like, okay, Superman is essentially the sun god. Like, he is all powerful. There's nothing he's bad at. And so, okay, how do you make a character like that interesting? It's not the things that people are good at that make them interesting. It's the things they're bad at. It's the self-doubt, the insecurities. Those are the things that make characters interesting. And that's what you have now with the Lion. He doubts himself. He doubts his strength. He doesn't quite know what he's doing as well. He's in a very unfamiliar universe. And so, like, he's kind of fumbling around doing his best. I think there's one of the worlds that he liberates, and like he goes to a different world, comes back to that one, and it's been destroyed. He's not perfect. He's just doing the best he can. And so, yeah, I like that he's not written to be this all-powerful super being.
I think for the people that aren't familiar with this storyline and haven't read the book, I think a lot of them go immediately to like, oh, so obviously Gilliman will like step aside and let the Lion rule, and it's like, no, I don't think that's what the Lion doesn't want that now. And if you go back to, you know, Ulanor, the Lion is absolutely, he's not at Ulanor, but he's absolutely one of those Primarchs that's like, I should have been a War Master. I started later than Horus. I accomplished just as much as he did, you know, blah, 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 blah. But now, the Lion's very clear. He wants to serve his father's Imperium. There's this fantastic quote, you know, that I've said many times on the channel where he's like, you know, I failed my father. I may have also failed my brothers. I will not fail my sons. And I just thought that's so beautiful because it just, that's proper character. That's actual narrative for a Primarch. It's really, really cool. So I'm absolutely loving the Dark Angel storyline. I can't wait for the Codex because that will have a bunch of new lore in it. Very, very exciting times for me.
100%. Couldn't agree more.
But
thank you. Paint some Dark Angels now.
yeah. But thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. This was the first time I've done one with two people. I was slightly worried about the technological side of things, whether my computer would hold up for me to actually stream this. Thank you so much for sticking with us all this time. And I hope you enjoyed it. Let us know what you think in the comments about everything we've talked about today. And we will see you again in the future, I've no doubt. And happy Halloween as well. Have a good one.
All right. Bye, guys.